Broadcasting on the internet airwaves from the great state of Minnesota, my name is Shaun and you're listening to The Shaun Tabatt Show. Today, my special guest is Daryl Boyer, and we're talking about his new album, which is titled The Cleansing, A New Creation, A New Identity, A Brand New Day. Daryl, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here.
Well, first off, let's help the audience get to know you a bit better. If I ran into you in a coffee shop and asked you to tell me who you are and what are you all about, how would you respond?
I would start off by saying I have been a worship leader and a carpenter for most of my life. Recently, kind of shifting gears into a lot more evangelism and worship.
Well, I think you're definitely the first worship leader, carpenter, evangelist I've had on the show, so you might be setting a new trend. We'll find out. Let's get a bit into your family. First, would love to hear a bit about where did you grow up? What's your church background? And then from there, transition into, are you married? Do you have kids? Tell us a bit about your family life.
I was actually raised in Jackson, Michigan, probably most of my life out there. About 8 years ago, I married a gal by the name of Stephanie. We have 3 kids now. We moved out to Ocean City, New Jersey. We're actually on an island, so that's kind of pretty, kind of nice. So I took a job as a worship director when I got out here and transitioned to a couple other churches shortly after that one. But I guess kind of bringing it up to date, I just felt led to write this new worship album and kind of take another turn towards stepping out and getting away from the church and getting out and preaching a bit on my own. And it's kind of what led me up to launching Daryl Boyer Ministries, which I guess was about February that we decided to step out and do that. We kind of had a background in the Assembly of God Church in the past, both my wife and I had kind of moved on when we moved out this way to more of a non-denominational, mainstream type church. It was a good time for us, but it was kind of getting a little dry. And as we sensed God calling us into this new venture, we started kind of, getting a new refreshing. We went to a Power and Love conference in Pennsylvania that kind of changed everything for us and kind of got a new direction to get this thing launched. And that kind of led us into the idea for this album that really essentially kind of talks about finding our true identity and stepping out into the full power of what God has for us. And that just kind of became the new direction we were going to take, I guess.
Speaking of Power and Love, I run into a lot of people who have been to those events, speak at some of those events, and minister in similar spheres. Obviously, identity is a huge part of those messages. For you, I guess I would love to hear, growing up in the Assemblies of God and then transitioning some into a more traditional evangelical church for a time, what was the shift for you at the Power and Love event? Like, how did God impact you? How did God use that to change the trajectory of your life and your ministry?
Well, that's definitely where it happened. I guess, honestly, up to that point, I understood the Holy Spirit, and I understood what that meant, to have a filling and a measure of that, to kind of step away from just saying, yes, I accept the Lord, and kind of going through the motions of daily Christianity, that I knew there was more. Even when I was back at the Assembly of God Church, I had obviously seen some of that, but kind of having stepped back into some of these other churches, that just kind of got pushed to the back of my mind. And I think when we were at the conference, we started to kind of get a real idea, kind of like we'd never seen it before, of, I guess you'd say, we just got a new revelation of what love unconditionally was, what God said he had poured into us from the beginning, just this whole idea of, we understood our sins were forgiven, and yet each day we kind of struggled with the idea of, I'm still not getting this right, I'm still not this, I'm still not that, and I kind of come into a realization through the conference and the time to follow that we were already completed and made new and given this identity that essentially we've been kind of blinded to seeing. So I guess really that just kind of brought the revelation of that truth to my mind and to my wife's mind, and we finally understood that that's just a deception, that we've been kind of walking in and living in, to believe that we're incomplete and that we're damaged goods and we haven't arrived, and it's not that we ever really truly arrived to perfection, but God sees us as this holy bride, to Him. And that's how, I guess, it just changed our perspective in our mind. We finally saw our value, and really that changed everything. Once you know who you are, now you can accomplish what you were called to. But yeah, it was definitely Power and Love that did that.
It's always fascinating to hear how an individual or a couple is impacted at any kind of a ministry event like Power and Love, because each of us have our own unique story, and God's working on us in a special way. No two stories are the same, so it's always fascinating to hear how God impacts somebody at an event like that. So I appreciate you giving us some perspective on how God was able to bring a shift or a change into your life and ministry. I know that The Cleansing isn't your first album. Just looking around a bit, you've been in music for quite some time, so would just love to get some perspective. How did you first get started in music? How has it been an important part of your life?
I always loved music, even when I was a young kid. I guess I got my first guitar, I think I was 12. Got some used guitar I found in the newspaper for like $75 or something, and kind of drove my parents nuts for a while with that. I wasn't very good for probably the first 2 years, but I kind of started getting the hang of it, and I guess it was, maybe my junior or senior year, I really started diving into putting bands together, and I guess we started playing what everybody was playing, the covers of stuff on the radio, and I kind of quickly realized, having been a kid in the youth group, that was kind of unfulfilling, and that I got an invite to start playing with some worship teams, and that was kind of where that shift musically changed for me. Once I got into the worship, I knew that there was really no other place I'd rather use, my talents. Then when I went on to college, it just kind of took off from there, where I got some opportunities through scholarship to join a traveling team that the college put together. So that just kind of fueled it for me and took it off, and I started doing some writing kind of in that season, and had taken my first position with the church, which was kind of a joint position of youth pastor and worship director. So that's kind of where it burst from. And I guess it's probably the next 6 or 7 years, I did 2 albums. It's pretty hard to find copies of those at this point, but those were my first few. And then I guess it was in 2012 I released an album called Armistice, which was kind of Christian rock, but not so much the worship album that we've kind of led up to with this last one. I guess that's kind of the background in a nutshell.
Another thing I always like to find out when I'm talking to a music artist, for you, as you look at your taste in music, the things that you've liked to listen to through the years, are there any particular musical influences or artists that really impact your work?
Yeah, there's a few. There's one actually that my daughter, like, if you listen to my music and you compare my voice and some of the style, not necessarily one of my favorite anymore, but it was a secular band actually by the name of the Guffs. I guess my daughter thinks it's really similar to that. I remember listening to a lot of that back in college, and I can kind of see some similarities. But probably Caedmon's Call, as far as Christian bands that I grew up really liking. Third Day, of course, was always a favorite for me. I've always been into Hillsong and Jeremy Camp and Jeremy Riddles, and I imagine that you can probably find a few things in my music that's similar to some of those. So those are probably my biggest ones.
It's always kind of a Pandora's box question to ask somebody about their musical influences. I've had people tell me, Guns N' Roses and Van Halen, and That doesn't bother me. I listened to that music too when I was a teenager. It's always interesting to see what I get when I ask that question. I appreciate you rolling with it.
I listened to plenty of that too. I was actually, now that you've mentioned it, I have to laugh about it and tell you. Somebody asked me for some old pictures the other day, and I went way back to, I guess it was like 1995. And for me in college, I was still kind of stuck in that rock era of, I don't know, it was not cool at the time, but I thought it was still. So I was obviously still dressing that way, and I was the guy kind of walking around the lounge at college, strumming the guitar, playing the stuff from 1980, and so I was always kind of the guy that loved the rock from years past still. So just kind of humorous. I have some of those influences back there too.
There are some people that can pull it off. The look, the music, it can be timeless. Most creative works have a story behind them. Talking to different creative folks who do music and books and movies, there always seems to be kind of that spark or that aha moment where a project just suddenly came to life. For you, when did you know that the cleansing was on the horizon? How did that get its start?
Well, I got the vibe that was something coming. Actually, before The Power and Love, let's see, I guess it was about 4 months prior to that. And I really didn't, I knew that I wanted to write a worship album. That's just kind of the leading I had in my heart. I didn't have any idea how I was going to pull it off or pay for it or anything like that. Just kind of looking around, I knew it was going to be a big undertaking. I guess it was June, maybe. It's hard to remember back. I remember, I guess, from the point that I started the album, from the time I started planning it, it was probably 3 months. It was really a lot of prayer, I think, up front in the beginning. And then when I finally sat down to start writing, it really wasn't like a lot of the stuff in the past where it took this laborious effort to craft a bunch of lyrics and come up with songs. It really just kind of wrote itself, which I knew I was on track to something for when it came that easy, So that was really exciting because I was used to sitting down for hours and kind of painstakingly going through the lyrics, and I just didn't have that with this project. It just seemed like everything was what was on my heart and what God was speaking to me with, and in devotion, and then it just was confirmed after Power and Love, and I just started to kind of see the bigger picture. I knew that the theme was something special. I knew that, there was really something to the fact that God wanted to bring us all through this process, of not just only coming to know Him in this relationship, but coming to know it fully, what it meant, what it stood for, to really truly lay it all down, to really truly cleanse everything. Not that, it was by our works to do that, but just by allowing it to happen. So I guess it's just, the revelation of what I have received over the last year has just been poured into this, I guess. So, kind of where it comes from.
And it'd be so great if every time we pursue something creatively, if we could just get that download from God and it would go fast. And, I was talking to an author yesterday and she just told me how a recent project she was working on, it's like, man, God was giving her a direct download and it just came together super fast. And it's like, I wish every author had that. Think of how many more books we could publish, or think of how many more songs you could write if everything just came together quickly. And sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. You kind of gave me a good lead into my next question. I would love you to just give a little bit more commentary on the significance behind the album title. And you gave us a little bit of that already. But one of the things that I thought was unique is you have a sort of subtitle for the album. Obviously, I see that a lot in the publishing industry. I work with books every day, but I don't always see that on an album. So just would love for you to comment on the title and then why the subtitle and what's the significance there.
Absolutely. Well, again, my idea when I came up with the original title was just taking a deeper kind of, when you think of like baptism and people think, it's interesting how few people really truly understand what baptism is all about. The whole idea of kind of dying and being born to this new life symbolically before the world and before God. Even people kind of are still learning a little bit about what that is, and to take that further from that point and saying that the idea of the cleansing was, the idea of the word, the water, and the fire, that God cleanses us with, all symbolically throughout the Bible. So it started there, and I just felt like, I wanted to say more, I guess, because when I originally came up with the title in that first title track, I hadn't finished, I guess, getting my download from the Lord, I guess, for lack of a better description. So as I continued to get more understanding of what it was that he was having me do, it just felt like I needed to expand that and talk about what it meant to be that new creation, what it meant to have a new identity, and that we're not a sum of our past mistakes, we're what he said we are from the day that he died. We received that then, but unfortunately, it takes us time to get that understanding, and being that now I have that understanding, I wanted other people to get it as well and understand that this is the brand new day. You've received it. You've been made a new creation. You have a new identity. You have a new name. This is who you are. Now that you know who you are, now you can go through life as you were intended. Now you can be, an impact. Now you can make an impact. Now you can manifest who God is in you. So that was where the second half of the title came in.
Thinking of the tracks on the album, for you, is there one or two songs that really kind of set the tone, set the pace for everything else?
I love the song. The first song on the CD was actually the first one for this album that I wrote. There was one song that carried forward from a past album, and it was just a new version. But the first of the new songs was King Jesus. It's track 1. That's probably one of my favorites. I know it was one of the first ones I released to the church before the album was out that they really, really picked up on and enjoyed in worship. It's just singable. It's easy. It really glorifies who Christ is as King, and it was a fun song. It was a fun song to record. It was just a pleasure watching people enjoy it, And I think secondly, just as far as lyric content goes, I would have to say my favorite song is Looking Down. And it just talks about the perspective of Christ on the cross, looking down at us, and, the love and what he did and what he accomplished. And it wraps the whole song up at the end, just really, if you can break down love and what it looks like and all he did to show that love, that's the little tag ending that I put on the song. And I don't know, it just kind of explodes with, such an intense message all at once at the end of it about the love of Christ for us. So that's probably my two favorites.
Well, I must have somehow picked up on that, because King Jesus and Looking Down are my favorite tracks from the album as well. The album's been out for a bit. Obviously, people have had a chance to listen to it. Have you had any interesting fan reactions? If people have gotten back to you and told you how they feel about the music, anything that surprised you?
I got a lot of good feedback, which was good to hear. I was hoping for that. I didn't get anything that was like strange or shocking that I can remember anyway. I think, as being the typical critical artist, because I could still go back at looking at it from the perspective of this is artwork, this is something I created, and I could probably pick it apart all day long, but it's funny because as much as I'm inclined to do that, everybody has been really uplifting with remarks and comments about the project as a whole, and certainly the content they've all been really, really blessed by, from what I'm hearing. So that's always encouraging.
Yes, when everybody's response is it's all good, that is always an encouraging thing. And, that's the struggle that every creative person has, whether you write, whether you're doing music, whether you're producing podcasts like I do. It's that creator's dilemma of you always know when it's not perfect. Nobody else is going to notice. Be like, oh, the timing on how I edited that wasn't, it's just a hair off. And sometimes you just got to let God give you some grace for yourself and take the praise and move ahead with life. For you, as you think of the album going out, more people encountering your music, what's your prayer for the cleansing? How do you hope the listeners are impacted by the music? How would you like to see the Spirit moving in their lives as they're listening to your songs?
I just see this as kind of being one of those albums where it's a worship album, but it's also kind of just, it's regular rock music too in some ways. So I think that I kind of have an angle maybe approaching some of the people that aren't used to like the typical worship stuff, maybe that think it's a little bit more mainstream. I guess maybe a non-threatening kind of a thing for them to pick up and maybe get interested in. It seems like I've already kind of seen some of that where it's blessing people that understand it already and understand their relationship with the Lord and that enjoy worship music, but it's also like impacting that other area of the crowd that honestly didn't originally intend it to be written for, but it's just been one of those like hidden blessings, where it's like I'd wanted it to reach everybody, but I'm really starting to see where it's more impacting to maybe a new believer or somebody that doesn't necessarily have a relationship yet. And that's really kind of where I hope to see it hit, actually. So I'm hoping that, within the church, as far as this goes, that, it'll just further be a springboard for me to maybe get in the door and kind of break down what it means a little bit more and just see where it goes. We're kind of wide open at this point and certainly don't have any real big plans of our own as to what we want to profess that it is or isn't. We're just kind of letting God walk us through this because it's kind of new for us.
So, beyond the music, obviously you've mentioned Daryl Boyer Ministries. We talked about how you had kind of a springboard at a Power and Love event. What do you see ahead of you ministry-wise? I guess I'd be curious to hear, where do you see God having you going in the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, we're really trusting God for some openings with some doors to just share in our heart. I think ultimately we have the biggest thing on our hearts right now, and the biggest thing that we see God pushing us towards still is to try to kind of get into some of the church settings where they're kind of asleep with some of the truth and the knowledge of where I think anybody in the times that we're living in needs to be kind of awoken to. I just feel like that's kind of where our calling is geared towards. So I'm hoping for opportunities to get into some of those churches and just kind of help to wake people up to what the Spirit's doing, who the Spirit really is, because I think people's understanding of the Holy Spirit living in them and what that really looks like and means and who, again, that we've been created to be and what we've been created to walk in. I feel like people are really kind of missing it, and that's just where our heart's at. And I think that the fact that that's on our hearts is kind of an indication that's where we're going to continue to head. But that's where we're hoping we're going.
Well, Daryl, if the listeners are interested in picking up a copy of the new album, interested in finding out more about you online, where are some of the places they should go to find you on the web?
Just the website's really easy. It's just my first and last name, DarylBoyer.com, DarylBoyer. Of course, we're on Facebook under both my name and under Daryl Boyer Ministries. We got a Twitter account. It's just at Daryl_Boyer. Of course, we're on iTunes and a lot of the regular music distribution stuff like Amazon and whatnot. So pretty much you type it in and it should come up and lead you somewhere. So.
All right. Well, I'll be sure to include links in the show notes for this episode so folks can just click right on through to find Daryl's website, his social media information, and pick up a copy of the album. You'll be able to find all of that at ShaunTabatt.com. If you don't see it on the front page, just search for Daryl Boyer and you'll be able to find the show notes for this episode. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation today with Daryl Boyer about his new album, The Cleansing. If you'd like to connect with Daryl, you can follow him on Twitter, where he goes by the handle at Daryl_Boyer. And you can also find more on Daryl's website, which is available at DarylBoyer.com. Daryl, just want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's been a great pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, Shaun. It's been good being here.
And that's all for this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion, you can connect with me via email using show@shauntabatt.com. Be sure to follow me on Twitter, where I go by the Twitter handle @stabatt. And if you enjoy the show, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. Until next time, this is your host, Shaun Tabatt, signing off.